So we've got a 20-mark history all around us question here. Let's have a quick look at it. It says, imagine you are a guide at your site. If you want visitors to understand why your site was important in history, either locally or nationally, which features of your site would you show them and why? Use physical features of the site as well as your knowledge to support your answer. So straight away we need to highlight this bit always appears at the end of the question. Use physical features of the site as well as your own knowledge. So obviously there we need to go back and think carefully about the site itself and knowledge. But let's just highlight some of the key words at the beginning. So we need to dissect what it means. Imagine you are a guide at your site. If you want visitors to understand why your site was important in history, either locally or nationally, which features of the site would you show them and why? So I'm going to dissect these keywords. So here we've got important. So there we're thinking about the significance of what we've been learning about. Meaning why are things important? Here we've got locally. So obviously there we're thinking about Doncaster itself. And then when we're thinking about nationally, we're thinking about obviously events like World War I, World War II, and I'm going to put there the Flying Scotsman also. Which features, so we're thinking about areas of the building, areas of the site. And when it says why, then the language of explanation is going to be needed for that. So for instance, thinking about connectives like we've explored. So just to recap, I'm going to be thinking about the significance of what happened at the site. I'm not going to think about locally or nationally. I'm not going to do Doncaster, but I am going to focus on the national events, World War I, World War II, and the period surrounding the Flying Scotsman. It's important to highlight again that the features mean the areas of the site, and I'll need to be explaining why using those connectives. The first point that I would make straight away is a reference about the satellite image. I'd explain how it's a Google map and it shows the scale of the site. I'd mentioned that it was 2/3 had been demolished. However, because it's a bird's eye view, it shows this footprint. I'd also then explain how the historical industrial background of the site, and as a result of this, DORA, the Defence of the Realm Act, led to the DPW being used in World War I. I'd use my own knowledge to mention the 1,000 shells per week and how women took over men's roles. And then the key bit is to mention where this took place. Now I know after my own investigations, this took place in the erecting shops. This was where machinery was used to make those large-scale locomotives. So I think it's really important that we include reference to the satellite image and the site itself first. I'd then focus on the paragraph around the Flying Scotsman. And the reason I do that is because with regards to the Flying Scotsman, I'd highlight the fact that Nigel Grizzly was the chief engineer, and then it was a period of rapid railway development. This was a significant period in British national railway history. I'd highlight how the DPW became a centre of technological excellence and innovation, and that it was actually built in the Crimpsall shop, and that heavy industrial machines were used. I'd highlight the significance of it with regards to how it broke 100 miles an hour. The fact that it got the record distance with non-stop travel during this period, London to Edinburgh, and then I'd make sure I highlighted the national significance. So there's a second point there on the Flying Scotsman. So just to go back to the main points of what I'm highlighting here, remember that we need to be focusing on the importance of these different things. Locally, remember I'm not doing locally, I'm doing nationally, and we need to be using features of the site. So moving on, I'd be focusing on next the era of World War II. So if we just kind of zoom in here, I would make similar links to what I'd already made to World War I. I'd not mentioned DORA this time, I'd use the Emergency Powers Act. I've mentioned that they built munitions again, but this time they built anti-tank and aircraft guns. Remember how they built and overhauled those American trains needed for D-Day. We've also forgot to put on here the fact that they used Horsa gliders and the significance of that for D-Day and helping to end World War II. But the specific areas, we know that this was across the site itself. It might be worth mentioning something like the Crimsall workshop or the erecting shop again. But I think it would also be useful to mention in terms of specific features. Don't forget railway links. It's just by Doncaster Railway. It was significant because the railway lines went into the plant works and they could transport all of this down to the south of England for D-Day and World War II. So just going back to the bigger picture, there's just one more thing that I want to kind of tie all the different areas up with. And so the final one revolves around the admin office, the admin officers. So as we can see here, the admin officers is the managerial and the design process. The administration revolves around things like where orders would take place, where purchases were made, where people got paid. So what was central to everything was the planning process. So whether it was the Flying Scotsman, World War I, World War II, none of the success that the plant work had on a national level was possible without these admin officers. And so with regards to specific features, the admin officers still exist today, and essentially it's still the strategic centre of all operations of Wabtec, and it was the strategic centre of all operations linked to these different phases for the plant works. So just a quick summary then. If we zoom back out, we can see here we've got four different parts to this. You'd need 4 different parts for the full 20 marks. But as highlighted, I'd start with the satellite image, the Flying Scotsman. We've got all these different points here. World War II era of national significance, and then I tie it all together with the strategic importance of the admin officers. So I've got my overall plan here, which I've completed, but I'm going to zoom in and look at all the different parts. So we can go straight at the top. I've just got the exam question that I've copied and pasted. Remember that it revolves around being a guide, and that we want visitors to understand why your site was important in history, either locally or nationally. Which features of the site would you show them and why? Use physical features of the site as well as your own knowledge. So let's have a look. Here's my clinching argument right here. This is essentially my stream of thought that will run throughout my answer, and that the Doncaster Plant Works was important on a national level due to its role during World War I, the era of the Flying Scotsman, and within World War II. So essentially that's my clinching argument, that it was important on a national level, and I've explained why. Some of the key words that I'm going to be using revolve around, as I already mentioned previously, DORA. I use the word munition, technological excellence, Crimsall shop, erecting shop, administration. There's obviously lots more in this, but these are just some of the key words that I'm going to use. And with the mark scheme, remember we need to smack the examiner in the face. We've just kind of done that with the clinching argument, but I'll look at how I start my answer shortly. We'll need at least 4 different paragraphs, and that is at least. We use 4 paragraphs here because you kind of can do an in-depth paragraph in each different point. But remember, you've got 30 minutes for this. 2 30-minute answers in that 1 hour. And essentially it's looking for knowledge as well as features of the site. Moving on from that, we need to look at connectives. These are what we're familiar with by now, but we must be using phrases like "this meant that," "as a result of this," "consequently," "this led to." And then the final part of this section here is the warning. And the warning revolves around, it's about knowledge and features of the site. But the examiner's report, it always refers to that candidates did not refer back to the question. And we've got to keep going back to the question throughout. That's really, really important. So looking at how I would start this, I'd smack the examiner in the face by directly answering the question in the opening sentence, and I would write, if I was a guide at the site, I would use my own knowledge and features of the events surrounding, that should say features of the site and events surrounding the Doncaster Plant Works role in World War I, the Flying Scotsman, and role in World War II, to highlight the plant works' national significance. To highlight the plant works' national significance. And then here are the different paragraphs. We've got our 4 different paragraphs there. So The first point will be revolve around the satellite image. Remember how I mentioned I'd actually show them a Google map, and that would highlight the scale of the site itself. I'd highlight that it was 2/3 demolished. I mentioned the historical industrial background, might mention that it was built in 1853 and how successful it was during this period. However, it was the defence of the rail map that led to the Doncaster Plant Works use in World War One. I'd mention 1,000 shells per week. I'd highlight that women took over men's jobs because they had to fight during the war, and I would actually highlight that most of this was done in the erecting shop. But also a specific feature of the site which we can also keep referring back to are the railway tracks, because it made it an ideal place in which to transport the munitions and the weapons out of the plant works to the location in which it was needed. And then we've got the Flying Scotsman era. I'm just recapping here what we've already looked at. I would mention how Sir Nigel Gresley was the chief engineer. It was a period of rapid rail development. I'd explain how Doncaster Plant Works was a centre of technological excellence and innovation. I mentioned that it was built in the Crimsall shop, and that its national significance revolved around it was the first steam locomotive in the world to break the 100 miles per hour barrier, distance from London to Edinburgh. And I'd also mentioned the glamour and romanticism and how the Flying Scotsman helped to develop this idea of glamour and romanticism within the British rail industry. And then finally, we've got World War II. That would be similar to what we've mentioned in World War One, but instead of DORA, I'd mention the Emergency Powers Act. Munitions, of course, anti-warship guns, the horse gliders and D-Day. That's the national significance here, because D-Day in 1944 helped to lead to the end of World War II. And again, I'll mention the features of the site, the rail links. Remember, it's got railways on the site, and railway lines, and the railway lines were important because it could transport these weapons to the south of England, where it could be used for the momentous D-Day. And then the final section would be around the administration bit and how the managerial and admin centre was essential for the planning processes that went on, whether it was World War II, Flying Scotsman or World War One. I mentioned how it was a place for where orders were made and purchases and payroll, and how essentially this was the strategic centre of operations. So quite a lot there to consider, but that's a plan to help you.